Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Exhibit C first. The story on Exhibit C has changed a little bit because there's opposing positions on what's happening to the growth in oil demand. The IEA, which is an organization based in Paris, that historically has been the organization of countries that use petroleum, has been projecting very low growth rates. And in fact, I've kind of copied the IEA here when 25 is 103.4 versus 102.9. It's more or less what the IEA was saying. Turns out, I guess, demand volumes are running higher. So the IEA came out with a new set of projections this week. It says that the oil demand is going to go up by 700,000 or 800,000 barrels a day, not 400,000 or 500,000 barrels. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, I have to start filling in some 26 numbers here. And I think I will follow their lead and have more growth projected in 26. What this means is that surplus up under the first set of numbers at 3.3 will decline. It doesn't have to decline all the way to zero. It can just decline to about 2. And most of the 2 will reside with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia claims that they can do 12 million barrels a day. I have them averaging 10.1 this year. So if we just get down to 2, that'll be a fairly well-balanced market. We turn to the bottom of page 2, where the oil market is just pretty flat at $63. If you look at 27, 28, it's all in the low 60s as far as the years go out. That is down significantly from last year, and I think it will remain down for a couple of reasons. First of all, despite all the publicity about Ukraine, it's not clear the European countries want to stop taking distillate from Russia. It's not clear that they want to put on secondary tariffs on India and China if India and China continue to take 2 million barrels each of Russian production. So much for, tougher sanctions on Russia. As far as sanctions on Iran goes, Iran has announced that they are at historically high rates of production. So our sanctions on Iran don't seem to be having that much of an impact on supply. So I think we're just kind of stuck in the low 60s. If we didn't have that macro uncertainty with Ukraine and Iran, I think it would be lower. But at this point, the futures level of $62 as far as the eye can see, I think is about right. Natural gas has gone into kind of a swoon. For the longest time, production just held in there at 106, but it did go up. The other thing that's happened is, despite all the publicity about additional power for data centers, power has been pretty darn flat. And I think that increase from 37.8 to 38.5, it's not much of an increase as compared to historic levels where it went up by 1.5 a day per year. And off the Platts numbers, 25 looks awfully flat to 24. So these numbers may be overstated. And that would account for, the increased production causing gas prices. You can see last Thursday, the price was $3.04. I mean, if you go back far enough, the price was pretty well established at $4. Now the futures price, it's in contango, so the futures price of $3.80, $3.90 per 26 is still there, but it is a bit disappointing. Exhibit A can be a lot of publicity about this over the next 2 weeks because they haven't gotten the expenditure bills done, and the House passed last night a continuing resolution to run till November 20th. The Democrats led by the minority leader and in the House and the Senate, Jeffries and Schumer, say that without some restoration of Medicaid funds, they're not going to vote for it. So there'll be a shutdown. So there'll be a lot of publicity on that over the next 2 weeks. I don't know what's going to happen here. I think the Trump administration is prepared, will almost welcome a shutdown as a way to kind of curtail more spending. But who knows how the politics come out. And that takes care of A, B, and C. Anything else, Mike, Jason?
Oh, we got a rate cut.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Quarter point. There was some, I think there was some hope for a half point cut. I know Jason was predicting a half point.
Well, I didn't think it would actually come out
yeah.
as a half point, but I thought maybe that's the direction they should go after the latest jobs numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfair to take someone in public service like the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, and have a nickname for him like Too Late, but which is what Trump does. But it's right. I mean, think of it. They had a 50 basis point. And Jason, was that last November, December? I forget exactly when it was last fall. There was, maybe it was even earlier in the fall. And some of the later statistics weak, the stock market was weak. They came down 50 basis points, and then they sat there until now. I mean, that makes no sense to me. They should have been coming down a horse.
You could say it was eerily timed to be right before the election, if I remember right.
To help Kamala. Yeah.
So, and, whether that's actually the case or not, it's certainly, if it looks like a fish, it smells like a fish, it's probably a fish.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we preserved lots of time to get into the history of biotech. So who's the lead there? Is it Mike or Jason today?
Maybe I'll kick us off and Mike will dive in. So we ended up basically entering the 1900s where we have germ theory and the understanding that microbes in the environment cause infections. We're not really far removed from the period in time where doctors decided that they should be washing their hands before surgery. So we're just now preventing infections, or deciding we should prevent infections, and we're yet to be at a point in time where we can do anything about infection once it begins.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are.
So in the 20s, there were people that studied bacteria, and there's a guy named Alexander Fleming. By all accounts, he was a brilliant researcher, but he was also known to be rather untidy. He would let his lab work pile up, literally. And so the story goes that he's studying some type of bacteria that can cause nasty boils and infections, and he left some petri dishes of it out on his bench while he went on vacation. And when he came back, the lab was a mess, and most of his dishes were ruined, and he was throwing these petri dishes in the bin, and something stopped him. One of those dishes, he noticed something weird. Bacteria was growing everywhere except for one spot where a splotch of green-blue mold had appeared. And around that mold was a clear and empty zone, essentially, where the bacteria was completely wiped out. So he realized the mold was producing a substance, a mold juice, as he called it, that had an active antibacterial effect. So this was the discovery of the world's first antibiotic. He named it penicillin after the bread mold that actually created it. As he's publishing his paper in 29, they're trying to reproduce it, and it's very difficult to reproduce. At this point in time, if you got a bad infection, you could die from it, or you'd have to have a limb removed or whatever. So, we kind of take for granted today that people don't die from these kind of common scraping a knee type things. But at this point in time, it was a big problem. So they did some trials, worked great in mice. The first human test was sort of notable because in 1941, they had an Oxford policeman use it, and the results were initially miraculous, but they did not have enough supply to keep him on it, and he actually ended up dying. So the scaling of production was really challenging. They even developed a process to harvest penicillin from the urine of patients that received it. And that guy was actually one of the guys that came over to the U.S. to help get the U.S.'s efforts involved in producing penicillin. And that's when production really ramped up. So working with American pharmaceutical companies and the US government, production was able to scale from a few hundred doses a year to over 2 million by 1943. Obviously, this was super important for World War II. It was used extremely heavily, and by 1945, Alexander Fleming was warning that overuse would lead to resistance, causing bacteria to evolve into like a superbug.
Yeah, I'll add the timelines. There's in 41 was the first time they gave it to a human, and by 44, they had developed a process to produce enough doses that they could supply it to every soldier on the Allied side. Coincidentally, that the company that was producing that was Pfizer. I think before that they were making food additive chemicals, different like citric acid, preservative, that kind of stuff. But they had a process to do deep tank fermentation that they adapted to grow essentially the mold that produced penicillin. So that propelled them into being the world leading pharmaceutical company that they still are. So it's kind of fascinating. And that time was, that a light bulb went off where there was a realization that in the environment, there's this battle between bacteria and other bacteria and funguses and that kind of it's not just that bacteria infect humans and animals. So that light bulb moment was that we can discover compounds that other microbes and fungus are producing in the environment, in the soil, and they'll have properties then to fight the disease-causing infections in humans. So that was a watershed moment, and that led to a lot of discovery of literally, as we alluded to last time, people digging up soil samples, growing whatever was in that soil, extracting the compounds, and then testing them on the bacteria that was infecting humans. So it was very much trial and error, and we were trying to discover things that were just growing in the dirt. And yeah, people were paid to bring dirt back from all locations on Earth. So it's kind of an interesting time. It's become known as the golden age of antibiotics. There was dozens of antibiotics produced between the mid 40s and up through 1970. The next notable one was the antibiotic that ended up curing tuberculosis. It was a team out of Rutgers University. They discovered streptomycin in a compound in soil. That was a case where it was one bacteria fighting another bacteria, and they tested it on cultures of tuberculosis, and it had a positive effect. Maybe the other big one out of that area was tetracycline as kind of the first real broad general use antibiotic that was discovered. So a lot of these things are still in use today that were discovered back then. But it's kind of fascinating that that's not even 100 years ago. So it wasn't even 100 years that we couldn't fight bacterial infections. And there's a good chance they became deadly.
Yeah. Now, we won't cover this likely even in the future episodes of this, but we've had a couple outbreaks of some pretty serious bacterial infections and evolutions of these superbugs. MRSA would have been one of them. And so you're probably familiar with some of these names. So it's always this sort of looming threat that there's going to be something that evolves that we don't necessarily have the tools to fix. So it could become relevant again very quickly.
Yeah.
So when we had the flu outbreak after World War I, which was the, kind of what COVID was compared to, it basically wasn't a whole bunch of medicine to deal with it. You just had to kind of progress through the population.
Right. It would have been very homeopathic in comparison to the way we approach today.
I don't think we really had much in the way of a means to fight COVID until it actually occurred, and the mRNA technology allowed us to produce the antibodies to fight it. We still don't have a lot of good ways to fight viruses.
Right. Yeah, viruses broadly are a problem not solved.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, we have a few extra minutes because we did A, B, and C pretty quickly, and we're talking about COVID. What the history of BioNTech, which is where Pfizer went to get a COVID vaccine that they could distribute, is that they were working on um, mRNA vaccines, and with particular focus on cancer. That seems so advanced as compared to, penicillin and the other antibiotics. But where exactly is the inflection point to go from things we're all used to for tuberculosis or regular penicillin? What happened to get that husband-wife team at BioNTech and others like them established so that they were able to turn out a vaccine for COVID?
Yeah, the inflection is probably in the 1980s with Genentech. So that's what's considered really the first modern biotech company, and that came about as a way they were creating a drug. Well, they were creating insulin. So kind of a lead into that is type 1 diabetes had been known for a long time, even in the ancient world. But it wasn't until the 1800s that scientists began to discover that the pancreas was involved in this process of regulating blood sugar. And then in the 1920s, was the first time someone isolated insulin out of animals and tested it on a human, on a boy, and it worked in regulating blood sugar. And it was relatively soon after that they developed a process where they were isolating insulin from the pancreas of cows as they went to slaughter. So it was quickly mass produced, and we had a method to treat diabetes. But we used that natural insulin for 50 years. And it wasn't until Genentech developed a process to use recombinant DNA to essentially engineer different living cells to produce human insulin that we could extract that. And we had a very pure form of it rather than pulling it out of cows. And that was really the inflection point for
and that was really
industry.
the first biotech, right?
Yeah, first biotech.
Yeah. First product, insulin.
Had there been a several-year effort to get there? Or how did Genentech happen? Was it, I mean, I know it was venture-backed, but how did they establish an objective to try to achieve, or was this the third or fourth thing they tried? Or maybe we ought to leave Genentech to next week.
Yeah, it's kind of a longer story in total. I actually don't know if that was their first intention or not. But we're going to investigate that.
Yeah. Good. Let's go to the first couple of pages. I know we are supposed to get further in the memo than the first 3 or 4 pages, and maybe we can try by starting with page 1. We've had lots of Alphabet news. We've had Apple news. We have Microsoft and OpenAI possibly getting to some kind of conclusion. We have Tesla news with Musk buying $1 billion of shares for cash. To the two of you, do you see anything noteworthy across those 5 companies on the first page that or should we move on to later pages?
I'd say for Apple, the product announcement last week was really interesting. Mainly interesting because nobody paid attention. It was like that basically the public is wanting more AI stuff, and there wasn't much in the way of AI stuff. They launched a new phone model, and the premium Pro model is now more expensive, but I think all of that's kind of fine, and that's just Apple continuing to iterate on its business, which it does incredibly well. The more exciting product launch was the AirPods Pro 3. And the reason this is interesting, one of the features they tout is that you can wear them and it will do live translation. So if you're walking through China and somebody speaks to you, you can actually get the translation right through. And based on the product reviews, these things are phenomenally better than the AirPods Pro 2 in all ways. And I think that where we're moving is to more of a virtual reality kind of situation. You have some news leaked about Meta and their new glasses. I think the AirPods are really Apple's AR product, and they've really done a good job with the product so far. So I'm pretty optimistic about where they're going with AirPods.
I think eventually they'll have AR glasses. I did get the update for their liquid glass display UI on my iPhone. I like it a lot more than the initial product demonstration led me to believe. And then regarding the iPhone Air, I think that's it. Kind of got panned in the U.S. market in the reviews, but I think it's really a product for China. The thin phones are a fad in China, and they've been losing market share. So I think that's a way for them to get back in the market. Also, the rumor is they're going to have a foldable iPhone in the future, so each side will have to be thinner. So I think they're just working towards that path.
Yeah. On Microsoft, aside from the OpenAI deal seeming like it's finally coming together, I don't have anything new. Tesla, Musk purchased 1 billion of his own shares. That's interesting. And then I believe they got a pretty major, they got approval in Nevada for robotaxi testing. So they continue to push forward on the robotaxis. So that's cool. Amazon, we should touch on next week, because tomorrow Jason and I are going for a tour of an Amazon fulfillment center.
Mm-hmm. See how many robots you can count.
Exactly,
yeah. Looking for a ratio, humans to robots.
H2 is Oracle, just gone all in on OpenAI. Larry Ellison's explanation is lots of growth in use, in inference, and need for data center capacity to handle that growth. And it looks like potential for lots of overbuilding, but his point, I guess, is that no matter what happens, there'll be a great deal more use of AI programs by everyone, everywhere, and that in time, the data center capacity, which Oracle is building for OpenAI and supposedly a couple of others, be required. I remember Jason was the one who a few years ago said, Oracle needs another look. Jason, do you think Larry Ellison is being too optimistic, or is this a sensible thing for Oracle to do, or what's your view?
I'm worried they're overbuilding, but I do think it's a sensible thing to do. I think the future, just as we had cloud computing centers, and AWS is the best example, the future is going to be places where we can generate AI-produced tokens. And Jensen at NVIDIA always alludes to this as these AI factories. And I think Oracle is building out their position as the best supplier for AI factories. So I think he has a good spot.
Ironically, they're in a good position because their database technology is kind of relevant again because of the way that they ported their old database technology into the cloud.
Right. My worry of the overbuilding is I do see a future where one day the inference occurs on edge devices. So how many of these giant data centers are required when some portion of the inference can get pushed to the edge device. No doubt there's going to be a need for a lot of AI tokens generated at these data centers. There's going to be agents that are running off premises in the cloud, but how much shifts to tokens generated on your phone?
We have to leave a little time for healthcare. Get to page 3 in NVIDIA in China. It appears to be clear that China is going to do everything they can to not be dependent on NVIDIA or other US companies designing chips. And you could see this coming, but I'm interested in what the two of you think. I personally don't see a retreat from China. I think they've decided that this is leverage that U.S. has over them, that they do not, they're very, very supportive of Chinese large language models, open source large language models, but made with Chinese chips. The two of you are investors in NVIDIA and have been for some time. It seems to me that NVIDIA's got plenty of business away from China, but how does the situation look to the two of you?
Yeah, I think the call from the top in China for people to use non-NVIDIA chips is more political than it is based in reality. Because there's another reality that occurred in the last week is that China is arguing that NVIDIA's failure to continue to sell its chips in China in order to comply with the U.S. export controls violates the Chinese regulators' remedy of the NVIDIA acquisition of Mellanox, which included a provision that they would provide an uninterrupted supply of chips to China and not discriminate against Chinese companies. So they're on one hand saying this, and on the other hand they're doing this, and I'm going to go with what they're doing rather than what they're saying as to guide where I think they're going. So I think they're going to buy a lot more NVIDIA chips.
Yeah. I think the only thing right now impacting NVIDIA sales is how many chips TSMC can produce for them.
How many wafers? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Have a few minutes left. We're going to run over a little, Jason, but healthcare news, Vertex
I don't
Lantheus
really have much in the way
Harrow
of
or others.
Yeah, I don't have a lot in the way of healthcare news. Maybe you can count this as life sciences, but NASA had an announcement last week of a year ago they had found biosignatures for microbial life on Mars. And the last year they've been brainstorming and testing ways that they can invalidate this discovery and explain it through environmental factors. But essentially they discovered organic carbon compounds and iron compounds. And on Earth, it's typically associated with microbial life. So by not being able to explain any other way that these could be created on Mars other than some microbial life there creating it, they haven't been able to rule out, or they can't definitively say it's life on Mars, but they've ruled out any other way that this was produced. So it's kind of a big discovery that got overshadowed in the news cycle, but I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I think the area where they collected the rock was believed to be a riverbed at one point.
Mm-hmm. So. Right.
I'm surprised it's not picked up by Elon Musk and his X account.
Yeah, so the NASA rovers there have been taking samples and then packaging them up in hopes that a future mission could go to Mars, pick up these samples and fly them back to Earth for humans to get their hands on it and examine it. So you're right. I'm surprised Elon isn't begging for that mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of Tesla, There's some publicity on the line model cars. The door's not opening, in an accident where the batteries are disabled. Is that a legitimate concern, or is that a pretty simple fix?
I think it's a legitimate concern. Their response is that there are emergency latches from inside the car, and there absolutely are. They're not. They're kind of hidden, especially for the back seats. So they're not intuitive to use, and it's impacted. I believe 9. Is it 9 people have?
I don't know the number, but
there's some number of accidents where this has become a major issue, and they couldn't rescue the people. So there's certainly something there, even though there are ways to open the door.
It'll probably result in a regulation change, I'd imagine. They may even say that the primary door handle to open from the inside has to be mechanical. Wouldn't be too surprised.
Yeah.
To the two of you, there's been some publicity, and on a closing note here, do the two of you believe that going to a used EV is economic as compared to a new EV or a new gas car? Or Jason, you believe that most of us won't have cars, that there'll just be robo-taxis everywhere. But during the remaining period where some of us will have cars, if you were planning on acquiring a car, would you be focused on the used EV market?
I personally wouldn't be. I know the values are holding up extremely well, but I guess in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, there's not enough data points on battery life.
I don't know that the used car prices are sort of a deal compared to gas car prices. Used gas car prices.
EV.
Yeah,
EV.
Yeah. But they're not for everybody. It depends. Yeah, if you can't charge at home, it's probably not the right thing. And that's the biggest thing.
Suppose you can't charge at home.
Yeah, in California, it's a no-brainer, I think. But what are you going to buy? I certainly wouldn't buy a used Ford EV or Volkswagen EV. Since we own a Rivian, would we buy a used Rivian EV? I don't know about that. I'd be much more comfortable buying a used Tesla than any of the others.
That's because they have a longer history producing batteries?
Yep. Well, there's just more on the road that have more miles, right? So you're buying a car, how many miles do you expect to get out of it? I think Tesla basically tells people 150,000. But there's plenty of cars that are on the road with a lot more. And then it gets into the, what's the failure rate at a certain number of miles, and you can kind of look at all of that. But the bigger problem is the software on the non-Tesla vehicles is terrible. And I think if you're using a car that is completely digital, you want one that's got well-supported software.
Great. Well, we're a full 5 minutes over, despite creating all that time with a short A, B, and C. So we'll have plenty to discuss next week. And in the meantime, everyone be well and stay healthy. And we'll see you exactly 7 days from now. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
The views expressed on this podcast are the host alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to and no reliance should be placed on the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The host and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.